Hello, everybody. Professor Barth is here, history professor at Arizona State University. Well, given my profession, I figured it might be worthwhile to address the controversy regarding freedom of speech at UC Berkeley. No doubt you've heard about it. What are my thoughts? Why do we support freedom of speech? Well, that is, by the way, a very important question. You cannot simply assume freedom of speech. You must have reasons for it. Why do we support freedom of speech? One, we support freedom of speech for freedom's sake. For freedom's sake. We like freedom. It is not pleasant to live under censorship. It is not pleasant to live under systems of control. Unless you're the controller, right? And that might be why some professors support this latest movement towards censorship, because professors oftentimes are the controllers, the gatekeepers. That's a good word to know if you haven't learned it before. The gatekeepers, the controllers, they're fine with control. But for the rest of us, control is not very pleasant to live under. So we like freedom of speech for freedom's sake. Second, we support freedom of speech because it enhances the culture. It allows for provocative ideas and for provocative people to push cultural boundaries. At the end of the day, it's easy to play it safe. It's very easy to play it safe. But if you want to be avant-garde, you're going to have to be a little provocative. In a smart way, right? Not a tasteless way, although it is your right to be tasteless if you so wish, but I would recommend that you do it in a smart way. Freedom of speech encourages this cultural enhancement, because it permits unpopular ideas and unpopular modes and methods of communication. I like this. George Orwell, whose real name was Eric Blair, once said, quote, "Take away freedom of speech and the creative faculties dry up." Wonderful quote from our good friend George Orwell. Third, we support freedom of speech because it furthers progress and civilization. When new ideas are not permitted, when new ideas are suppressed by the controllers, by the gatekeepers, society inevitably stagnates. The intellectual climate becomes stale. There are no challenging, daring ideas that expand our mental horizons because everyone plays it safe. And the most fresh ideas, the most daring ideas are always unpopular in the beginning. My favorite example is the abolitionist movement. Especially when we're talking about the early abolitionist movement, when it was unsafe to be an abolitionist. It was safe to be an abolitionist by the late 1850s, even though you could argue that it was a bit daring. But in the 1830s, in the 1840s, it was not safe to be an abolitionist. It was extremely unpopular. Rioters interrupted abolitionist speeches in the North. Abolitionist newspaper offices were ransacked, looted, burned. Abolitionist mail was banned from by the post office. And if UC Berkeley was around back then, UC Berkeley would have banned abolitionists from speaking at their school. Right? And that is true. You know, and it's sad that UC Berkeley has become, or is becoming, the brunt of jokes like that. But, you know, UC Berkeley has brought it upon themselves, and if they're not careful, they continue down this path, is it's going to be difficult to take UC Berkeley seriously as an educational institution. We'll still take it seriously. We'll take it seriously as a threat to freedom of speech. But as an educational institution, it is becoming increasingly difficult to take Berkeley seriously. I mean, you look at their chancellor, who has been in the news the last week. Chancellor Nicholas Dirks is his name. A chancellorship that has been embroiled in controversy, just, mishandling of sexual harassment cases, misuse of federal funds, of state funds. A couple years back, he began construction of a $400,000 fence around his on-campus mansion. $400,000 to construct a fence around his mansion. I get to build that wall, right? Build that wall. So this guy, Nicholas Dirks, I said, if Berkeley's not careful, it's going to be difficult to take them seriously as an institution. Nicholas Dirks, guy makes, what was it? The figure I saw, over $500,000 a year? Over $500,000 a year, right? And I mean, you look at the man, like, I'm just saying, like, you don't usually want to do this, but you look at the man and just reeks pretentiousness, right? And he thinks to himself, I'm a man of the people. I'm a man of the people. I understand. Man, meanwhile, totally aloof, making over $500,000 a year, constructing $500,000 fences, walls around his house, banning speech left and right. Get to that in a moment. So Berkeley was around back then. I mean, abolitionists would have had no luck. Speaking at UC Berkeley, we return to abolitionists. Slowly, in the 1830s, 1840s, 1850s, because of freedom of speech, the abolitionists were allowed to spread their ideas, and it gained momentum. Right? The First Amendment allowed for that to happen. Even though it was extremely unpopular, you could be an abolitionist and not be thrown in jail for your views. Harriet Beecher Stowe could write Uncle Tom's Cabin in 1852 and not be thrown in prison. As the First Amendment. Freedom of speech is essential to progress and to civilization. And yet, freedom of speech is gravely imperiled in our United States of America today. As recently as 20, 30 years ago, free speech enjoyed unqualified support from the left in this country. And in fact, it was usually conservatives that supported moderate limits to free speech. It was the left who were the ultimate champions of free speech, the right to express your opinions, right? No matter how controversial, no matter how provocative, no matter how unpopular. That was the left. Now, there are still voices on the left, influential voices, powerful voices, who champion free speech. And of course, we support them, and we're allies with them. And yet, there's no doubt that a creeping specter of censorship now enjoys an equally powerful, if not more powerful, voice among the left in this country. In fact, I would say that censorship and book burning, and by book burning I mean metaphorical book burning, right? Although it could go to literal. At this pace, like, literal book burning does not seem implausible. But censorship and book burning is very quickly becoming mainline in this country as a view, as a political point of view. And nowhere in this country is free speech more imperiled than the university campus. UC Berkeley, once the birthplace of the free speech movement, has suddenly become the most hostile space for free speech in America. It is the symbol, or has become the symbol, of the censorship movement, and as such, it is now being targeted by free speech activists as the primary battleground in this upcoming contest between censorship and free speech. Most recently, a scheduled talk from Ann Coulter, an admittedly provocative speaker, was banned by the university, and then, after enormous pressure, rescheduled, but at a very inconvenient time. Before the university banned her speech, they first proposed a series of unusually difficult demands, asking her basically to jump through a million hoops, right? A million hoops. But then when Coulter called them out on their bluff and said, okay, I'll take your demands, they said, you weren't, we didn't expect you to do that. You can't speak. Right? That was the inept Berkeley administration for you. Now, after lots of pressure, and a lot of professors on the left spoke out, including at Berkeley. Robert Reich, for example, left a Facebook post criticizing the university for canceling Coulter's speech. After enormous pressure, they now say, okay, you can speak, but at this very unusual time when students won't be on campus, on and on. And Coulter's rejected that, and now she's saying, I'm going to speak at my original time, which is this upcoming Thursday, April 27th. And I'm going to speak then no matter what you say. Go ahead and arrest me and send me to jail if you want, if you wish, right? So we'll see what happens this upcoming Thursday. If I were Berkeley, I would not arrest Ann Coulter if she comes to campus speak on Thursday. Because Ann, whatever you think of her, I mean, she is provocative, but provocative speakers are, throughout history have played a key, a critical role in culture, and so she has her place. And so if you prevent her from speaking, that's only going to help her more, right? So that's this upcoming Thursday. We'll see what happens. Earlier this month, the Berkeley College Republicans had to cancel a speech by David Horowitz, who at the end of the day is a pretty mainline conservative writer, a bit hawkish for my taste, right? A little too hawkish, but nonetheless, right? He has a right to speak, but that speech had to be canceled because of threats of violence. And of course, who can forget, back in February, a scheduled speech by Milo Yiannopoulos had to be canceled after masked rioters smashed windows, set fires, pepper sprayed women. He's going around pepper spraying women. Police, by the way, during this whole ordeal, just stood by, just watched it happen. Masked rioters. Look at those pictures. Those masks. That is fascism, people. That is what fascism looks like, plain and simple. It's fascism. And in the truly Orwellian way, in the name of anti-fascism. Fascism in the name of anti-fascism. They call themselves Antifa. Right? Antifa, at the end of the day, is a terroristic, fascistic organization that shuts down speech through violence and through intimidation. That is what fascism is, and that's what Antifa does. That's what they do. Look at this one video. This is from the other weekend, last weekend, the 15th of April. Just total thuggery. Total thuggery. Fascistic thuggery. But, I mean, we want to be fair to Berkeley. right? We want to be fair to Berkeley. Berkeley is not alone. There was violence at Heather McDonald's speech at Claremont McKenna College earlier in April. Again, agree with her or not, she has a right to speak. Right? I don't agree with everything Heather McDonald says. There are some things I disagree with her on. She has a right to speak. In 2014, Condoleezza Rice. Again, Condoleezza Rice, I have a lot of problems with Condoleezza Rice. Her handling of the Iraq War. Her connections with the Bush administration, so on and so on. I got issues with Condoleezza Rice. But in 2014, Condoleezza Rice was banned from giving the commencement speech at Rutgers after faculty protested that she did not meet their definition of exemplary citizenship. So you're talking about the first black woman to serve as National Security Advisor, the first black woman to serve as Secretary of State, and yet that's not exemplary citizenship. Again, I don't agree with everything she did. I don't agree with a lot of what she did. But she's an accomplished woman. She has a right to give a commencement speech. But she was banned. Banned. It doesn't matter. Condoleezza Rice did not agree with them on every single issue. So you banned. When David Horowitz was canceled at Berkeley earlier this month in April, a spokesman from the university said, quote, "It has nothing to do whatsoever with the speaker's perspective and everything to do with safety. That is total baloney." Total baloney. And they know it's baloney. They know it's baloney. The university system talks a good game about diversity and tolerance, but there is nothing. The university establishment hates and fears more than intellectual diversity, and they will not tolerate it. And as a caveat, as a very necessary caveat, let me just say there are many great professors. I know a whole bunch of them. In my own department, I know professors who are fierce advocates in my history department of freedom of thought, of intellectual diversity. Okay, and these professors, they're great people. They teach great classes, right? But the trend of the university establishment is undeniable. It is undeniable. And it's time that all of us, no matter what our political persuasion, right? It is time that all of us reaffirm our commitment to freedom of thought and of speech. We cannot take it for granted in this 21st century. Why do we take freedom of speech for granted? It did not exist in the vast majority of prior periods of human history. Vast majority of states did not have freedom of speech. Vast majority of epics and of eras did not have freedom of speech. Why do we assume that freedom of speech will continue through the 21st century? We have to defend this thing, man. We have to defend this thing. There is an orthodoxy at our universities. There is a doctrine at our universities, and it has become increasingly dangerous for anyone inside the university to even remotely challenge it. I would say at the end of the day, actually, Arizona State University is pretty good. ASU is pretty good. A lot of these universities, man, like, there's a lot of pressure, a lot of pressure to stay silent if you disagree with that doctrine, good old doctrine. Look at this quote from George Orwell. I like this one a lot. At any given moment, there is an orthodoxy, a body of ideas which it is assumed that all right-thinking people will accept without question. It is not exactly forbidden to say this, that, or the other, but anyone who challenges the prevailing orthodoxy finds himself silenced with surprising effectiveness. A genuinely unfashionable opinion is almost never given a fair hearing, either in the popular press or in the highbrow periodicals, aka universities. And by the way, on this question of doctrine and orthodoxy and such, there is an unintended consequence of all of this. Like, you guys do know that, right? There is an unintended consequence. You end up making the prohibited ideas look sexy. You do. You make those ideas look sexy. I don't even think you all realize that all that much. Young people like to rebel. They like to rebel against the generation preceding them. The minute you tell young people you're not allowed to think this way or that way, you inadvertently encourage them to think that way. I heard, you may have, some of the people watching this video may have heard of a man named Gavin McInnes, right? I heard Gavin McInnes say it this way. He said, a lot of these cultural gatekeepers, they've become the new, he called them the new church ladies, the old church ladies. So, like, you think back in the 20th century, right? Like when, people still went to church and all that. You got your old church ladies saying, don't do that, don't do that. Policing everything. And y'all have become the same thing. Like, you morphed into that. Young people don't buy into that, and they're going to rebel against it. There is a backlash. I predict it's going to be a big backlash coming. And I think it's going to happen under Generation Z, the so-called post-millennials. And the polls already indicate this, by the way, that they're rebelling against the current orthodoxy. It's going to cause problems in a classroom because a lot of these more old-time professors who got their degrees in the 60s and such and 70s, a lot of these professors are still acting like it's the late 20th century. And by that I mean a lot of these professors think that they are cutting edge because they're spouting ideas that were cutting edge in the late 20th century. But it ain't the late 20th century anymore. It's not the late 20th century anymore. We're about to enter the second quarter of the 21st century. Right? You all do realize that. The second quarter of the 21st century. And so those ideas that were cutting edge in the late 20th century, they became orthodoxy. And my prediction, or you could argue it's already the case, but my prediction is within the next few years, by the 2020s, and 2020 is only 3 years out, the truly cutting edge is not going to be to just parrot all this late 20th century stuff. The truly cutting edge is going to be to challenge this orthodoxy, right? And that will cause some problems on campuses, right? Because some of these professors, some of these more old-time professors, the baby boomers, Generation Xers, and don't get me wrong, there are a lot of good among them. I'd say a good chunk of them, right? A lot of them can't tolerate it. It can't tolerate it, so it's going to cause some problems. But we'll just see. We'll just see. I'm just predicting. And ironically, this incongruency between different generations, between students and faculty, ironically, that's precisely what happened at Berkeley in the 1960s. That's what sparked the free speech movement. Right now, UC Berkeley is the predominant symbol of the censorship movement. But wouldn't it be a beautiful thing if a student-led free speech movement part 2 took over Berkeley again in these upcoming years, right? That would indeed be a beautiful thing. I'll tell you what, like, the Berkeley administration is scared to death of something like that happening. Just like the Berkeley administration of the 1950s and the early 1960s were scared to death of that happening as well, right? History, they say history repeats itself. That's not really true. I've heard a better way of characterizing that. History rhymes, and we're about to see a major rhyme occurring in history, and I'm looking forward to being a part of that. So we'll just see what happens. But in any case, hope you enjoyed this video, and until next time, God bless.